I was raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it definitely shaped me. Like so many young people, I got turned on to theater in school. When I was in the 5th grade, I was cast as Rumpelstiltskin. I was given a very long gray beard, a wild costume, and I was able to turn thread into gold. And that made an impression on me. It was pretty heady for a 10-year-old to have that much power, but it really, and I remember this, it was like, it taught me about the power of the theater. Because here I was, this 10-year-old kid with a beard, doing the Rumpelstiltskin thing, and people were like, wow, wow. In high school, I was fortunate to have a teacher who did plays with us by Chekhov and by Ionesco and Ayn Rand. Who does Ayn Rand plays? No one. It was the 60s. I spent my teen years at Bill Graham's Fillmore Auditorium in San Francisco seeing Jimmy and Janis and the Dead and the Airplane. And in Bill Graham, y'all know who Bill Graham was?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. Through Bill Graham, I didn't know this at the time, but he showed me exactly what an impresario looks like. He was always outside checking us online, making sure everything was cool out there. He introduced every show from the stage. You'd see him in the lobby during the breaks, either offering you a free apple or threatening to throw you out. He was tough, but he made such an impression on me. And he was part of a production of Altamont in December of 1969. I was part of the 300,000 people that went to the Rolling Stones concert at Altamont in south of San Francisco, which was a complete disaster. People were being killed. I mean, it was awful. It was definitely the end of the 60s. There's a great film about it called Gimme Shelter that the Stones made, which amazes me because they had hired the Hells Angels as stage security. And, it's a motorcycle gang, not the smartest thing to do. I went to San Francisco State College, which had been very much radicalized, and I directed and acted and produced dozens of productions. And just before graduation, I was invited to a meeting with some classmates, and they told me they wanted to start a theater, and they wanted me to run it. So I was like 20, okay? And I said, well, okay, I must know how to do that. I immediately went out and found a space, which happened to be in a commune in the Haight-Ashbury, which was the center of the hippie universe in the world, really, but especially in San Francisco. We moved into the commune, we built a stage, we hung lights, we started promoting a show, and the fire department closed us right down. We had no permits for public assembly. I remember we had a bale of hay in the middle of the theater, and they were just looking at it like, are you nuts? So I called the landlord of the building, which happened to be the Methodist church. It was an old church. And I spoke to Pastor Mel, and he said, hey, I like theater. Why don't you do the show for me? So we said, okay. So he came over to the commune. We did the show for him. And he said, I love it. Why don't you move into my church basement, which was the size of a gymnasium, on the corner of Market and 16th Street in the Castro district of San Francisco, which was the center of the gay universe in the world right then at that time. We moved in, we named our theater Eureka, and got our permits, and it lasted an extraordinary, in different incarnations, 45 years. Did you know that, Steve? Steve Coates here, we met, I think, at the Eureka Theater. It could be possible.
Auditioned for him, he didn't cast me.
Exactly.
Forever.
And ultimately, one of the things that it did do, it was after I left, was it premiered the first part of Tony Kushner's epic Angels in America trilogy. So a lot of cool stuff came out of that theater. We made no money, of course, so I hustled acting work as an extra on films like Towering Inferno, where I met Fred Astaire, and O.J. Simpson. Strange combo. They were in a scene together. The Streets of San Francisco, Carl Malden and Michael Douglas, and any other TV or film that was shooting in the area. I also worked for the long-running adaptation of Ken Kesey's novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which ran an incredible 6 years in North Beach, the center of the Topless universe. And I worked as an understudy on that show to 4 roles. I did props, I did concessions, I was a house manager, and I sold a little weed for the company manager on the side, as Gary pointed out. And I made $75 a week. And I was like, I have arrived, I'm in show business, this is happening right now. And I remember I drove an old red truck that at some point the hood had flown off, you know, in the Embarcadero or something. And so I was driving around with this truck with no hood. And Johnny Weissmuller Jr., you know, Johnny Weissmuller Sr. was Tarzan. Jr. played Chief Bromden. You know, if you know Cuckoo's Nest, there's the giant Indian man who doesn't speak. So Johnny Jr. Played that part. He was actually, he was with me in Towering Inferno too. We were both burn victims, and we were in pajamas. They dressed us in pajamas and robes, and it had like soot all over our faces. And we just sat around because they could only shoot from when it was closed. They shot at the Transamerica, that pyramid building in San Francisco. So they could only shoot from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So we were. And Johnny was very experienced in show business. His father was Tarzan. And so Johnny would go, let's go to the bar. They're not going to call us for hours. So we'd go to the bar, drink up. I mean, we were extras, you know, so who cares? Anyway, that's where I met Fred. I just stopped him. Astaire was rehearsing. He had a scene with O.J. Simpson and a cat. If you saw the movie, you may remember the scene. Anyway, O.J., so they're walking up and down, and right in front of us, there's a bunch of firemen and a bunch of us extras. And Fred was rehearsing his lines, and he would walk to one end of the stage, of the floor, do a little step, and turn around and walk back. And just memorize. And I was like, Fred Astaire is dancing in front of us. And so anyway, after the shoot, whenever I got an opportunity, I met him. He's about this tall, you know, and it was like, give me an autograph and stuff. It was sweet. And OJ was hanging around too. Little did I know. So those first 6 years at Eureka, when I was running the place, we did more than 30 productions, 2 of which moved to commercial runs in San Francisco. And that's also where I first met playwright Sam Shepard and actor David Strathairn. We had booked Sam's first wife, Olan, in a play called The Birthday Party, a Harold Pinter play. And David Strathairn played the lead, Stanley, in that play. And it's funny about that is that I ended up working with Sam and Dave, for 50 years after that. I worked on and off with those 2 guys forever. And it's so weird. I just finished 2 years ago. I directed these 2 Shepard one-acts at the Woodstock Playhouse. And David was in it, along with Estelle Parsons and Jack DeJohnette. I'm going to talk about that a little later. But so 50 years later, I'm still working with David Strathairn. Sam's dead now, but you know, his work lives on, obviously. So anyway, in '78, I took a break from Eureka to visit an actor friend who I'd met at the Eureka, who was on a show there in New York City. And after a week in New York, I realized that this was actually the center of the universe. Every place else I'd been was not. And so I called Eureka and I said, hey guys, I'm not coming back, who wants it? And I moved to New York City. And I immediately got to work on the premiere of a new Sam Shepard play at the Public Theater, Joe Papp's Public Theater. That play was called Curse of the Starving Class. It was actually the American premiere of that play. And it featured the actress Olympia Dukakis. You all know who Olympia was. And I went on to work with her. She had a theater in New Jersey called the Whole Theater Company. And she hired me to do play development there after we got to know each other. I also supervised the premieres of 2 other plays of Sam's. Fool for Love, which featured Kathy Baker, Ed Harris, and as understudy, Bruce Willis. Yes, that's right, Bruce Willis. He was the understudy. Sweet guy. This is a good side Bruce story. He was the understudy. So, which, you know, means you go on when the lead is, you know, not well. So after Ed Harris left the show, we had to search for a replacement. And the producers were insistent that they get a name. We need a name. And we kept reading actor after actor. Meanwhile, Ed left, and Bruce had to take over. He had to do the show 8 times a week to cover until we found somebody to replace Ed Harris. And Bruce did this for weeks, which means he kept the show open by doing this. And finally, at a certain point where they cast somebody, I can't remember who, I think it was Aidan Quinn actually, but at any rate, Bruce he just proclaimed, "I'm not going to be a pawn in your game, I'm out of here." And he quit the show. Simultaneously got an audition in LA for the TV show Moonlighting. Now, that was Bruce Willis's huge break in his career, was that TV show with Sybil Shepherd. Had we booked him, had we cast him in Fool for Love, no Bruce Willis, you wouldn't even heard of him. It would be like no career. So, pretty funny. Anyway, Eureka, where was I? Yes, Curse, Fool for Love. And then the last piece I worked with Sam was a play called The Lie of the Mind. Great play. It had an amazing cast, including Geraldine Page, Harvey Keitel, Aidan Quinn, Amanda Plummer, Bill Patton, and David Strathairn. I was fortunate during my entire 12 years in New York City to be able to work and make a living exclusively in the theater. Back then, at what was then called the Chelsea Theater Center on 43rd and 9th, it was a 2-theater off-Broadway complex, 200 seats and 300 seats. I produced the American premiere of Nobel Prize winner Dario Fo, who was also a major Italian anarchist. His play called We Won't Pay, We Won't Pay. David Strathairn was in that one too. It was kind of a hit, and against all odds, because it was a communist play, basically. It was about not paying for groceries because they're too expensive. And it ran. So anyway, meanwhile, the Chelsea Theater Center people, they're a repertory company for many decades in New York City, but they were deep in debt, and they were in real trouble, and they couldn't pay their $5,000 Con Ed bill. And they told us they'd have to close the theaters. And we went, we have a show running here. You can't close us. So we made a deal. Me and partners made a deal to pay the utility bill and take over the lease of that theater, whose name we changed to the West Side, and it's still the West Side Theater now. And we ran the place for several years. We hosted a lot of premieres of plays, including Extremities with Susan Sarandon and Farrah Fawcett. That's how long ago it was, Farrah Fawcett. Pump Boys and Dinettes, Really Rosie, March of the Falsettos, Frankie and Johnny and the Claire de Lune, the Miss Firecracker Contest, Sister Mary Ignatius Explains It All for You, and Penn and Teller. All those shows were at that theater in those years. It was a busy, busy place. Also at the same time served as program director for New Dramatists, which is the oldest playwright service organization in America, where we developed new works and presented readings by their member writers, which included August Wilson, John Patrick Shanley, David Margulies, Beth Henley, Emily Mann. It was an incredible time. Playwrights would come in and go, look, I got a new play, or I got a new scene, or I got whatever. And we'd sit and they'd either have a cast in mind, or we'd just go through the files of actors and come up with the cast, do the workshops, and finally stage readings generally. It was great. And then at the West Side, I created a nonprofit called New Writers at the West Side, where we commissioned very short works and presented stage readings from writers as diverse as Lewis Black, David Mamet, Arthur Miller, and Casey Curdy, who's here tonight with us in the theater. I was very fortunate to meet my wife, Casey Curdy, in New York City in the late 80s. I produced and directed a play she wrote called Three Ways Home, which starred Oscar nominee Mary McDonald, Emmy and Golden Globe winner Asapatha Murkison, and Emmy nominee Malcolm Jamal Warner. Now, none of these people had won any awards when we cast them. People didn't really know who they were. I mean, Mary and Asapatha were both very well-respected actors in New York, but they went on to a lot of acclaim. Malcolm was the kid in The Cosby Show, if it doesn't ring a bell. The great director-producer Alan Pakula of To Kill a Mockingbird, Sophie's Choice, All the President's Men. He loved the play, and he got Columbia Pictures to buy it, and Casey got a bag of money, and she had to focus on writing this film script over the next year or two with Alan and his producer. And our son Malachi had just turned 2. So and New York City at that time was just at the beginning of becoming impossibly expensive. I'd already moved to 2 places in Manhattan, and we were in Brooklyn at this point. I'd already moved twice in Brooklyn, and there was really nowhere else to go. And we had visited Ulster County a lot because Casey went to school at SUNY New Paltz briefly, and knew folks here, and we fell in love with the area and we moved up. Casey went on to work on her screenplay, and she also did a lot of other TV and film projects, and got an Emmy nomination for one of them. And plus we did the play in Los Angeles as well, which was great fun. Eventually her work started to slow down, and I realized how out of touch I was with the theater. I'd lived up here for almost 2 years, and out of sight, out of mind. Nobody cared. And the hustle I used to do in New York was constant. It was a constant hustle. It was just always looking to hustle some job, but I was not there. So it was a little scary. So anyway, I saw this ad for UPAC needing an executive director, and I applied. And then I went down to the Lincoln Center Library. This is all pre-internet, of course. So you had to actually go to a library if you wanted to find out anything about anything. And which was, I worked in a library when I was a kid. I loved libraries. And Lincoln Center Library, if you've never been, it's incredible. I mean, you can ask for almost anything and they have it. And plus a lot of film, and anyway. So I was doing research on UPAC. And while I was there, I saw that the Bardavon was looking for the exact same job, the executive director gig, at the same time. So I applied to the Bardavon. And it's kind of a lesson of how different the 2 theaters were. The Bardavon responded immediately, set up an interview for me. UPAC never responded. I called them 2 or 3 times and said, I live 20 minutes away. I'd like to apply for the job. Could you please? Oh yeah, we'll get to you. Boom, 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 boom. I said, I told them the Bardavon's interviewing me. Coincidentally, a second interview. I went to 3 interviews at the Bardavon. 3rd interview at the Bardavon. I know they're going to hire me. I call UPAC and go, hey, nothing. 6 months later, they hired somebody. Anyway, so I got the job. 6 months later, they hired somebody at UPAC, and then 12 years later, the UPAC board approached us to save them. So I got the job, ultimately. It just took 12 more years. So we took UPAC over, took it out of bankruptcy, and the rest is history. We ran it for, it's still running it. It was 19 years ago. Anyway, I got the job at the Bardavon in '94, and nobody told me during these 3 interviews that the building was in seriously bad shape. And in fact, the stage house itself, the building that's 80 feet above the stage that holds all the rigging for drops and sets and lights, was described by 3 different structural engineers thusly: House of Cards, Sword of Damocles, and my favorite, Fear of Imminent Collapse. And I was like, and it was like 2 weeks on the job. So I crawled up to the main beam, just like these beams. It was like about 70 feet up. And I knocked on it, and it was hollow. It was like, how balsa wood sounds when like nothing in there. And somebody, I knew who, Bruce, had slammed 2x into that and then into something else above it. That's what was holding the building up. It was just, whoa, that is scary as hell. And the fascinating thing is the Bardavon was built by a man named James Collingwood, who was a coal and lumber merchant in Poughkeepsie, English guy. He was an immigrant who had moved to Poughkeepsie and built his incredible business, the lumber and coal business, on the spot where the Bardavon is. And so as a thank you to his adopted city, Poughkeepsie, he built the Bardavon. And it was called the Collingwood Opera House after him. And it was called that until the 20s, when they changed it to the Bardavon, an impossible name to why they named it the Bardavon. I mean, I know why. The Bard of Avon, that's why. And back in the 20s, when they made this transition from Collingwood to Bardavon, they painted a mural on the soundboard that's above the proscenium that you can see. We opened up a little corner of it, a couple corners of it years ago. Anyway, and it was Shakespeare sitting on the banks of the Avon River with all his characters' faces sticking out. And we have a photograph of it from the 60s. And it looks kind of weird. And as the Evergreen, who's the renovators that we talked to about it, they said, look, if it's terrible, because it's still up there. I mean, it never, they whitewashed it out. They didn't take it down. It's still up there from the 20s. They said, if it's terrible, we'll repaint it. Don't worry. So, but we never did it because it was like a $200,000 job and it wasn't broken. It was just painted over. Anyway, where was I? Bardavon. Yeah. So sort of Damocles. Yeah. So that began just a endless. I didn't know that my job was going to be toilets and boilers, as we used to say, but that's what it became. I mean, we were in an 1869 building, and then at UPAC a 1920s building. And if anybody owns an old building, it's just not nonstop. So we did 25 million. Actually, was the last count, and actually we're just talking about a project today. I don't technically work at the theater anymore, but I still obviously communicate. But yeah, we did so much work. It was mind-blowing. If you do remember UPAC, when I first saw UPAC, this is years ago when I first moved here, every seat was gaffer taped together. Every single one. Duct tape, every one. And all the carpeting was duct taped. The paint in the theater was a rainbow. It was like they'd have a can of blue, they paint until the blue end, and then they had a can of white, and then they were it was mind-blowing. And it was like horrifying. When I went in there, I went, ugh, this is horrible. What was the other thing that was? Oh yeah, and then they had plastic over the exit doors to keep it warm, over covering the exit doors. It was just, this isn't legal. Anyway, luckily, when we took over in 2006, the UPAC had done a whole bunch of cosmetic stuff. They painted it, they replaced the seats, they replaced the carpeting. Thank God. What they didn't do was the bathrooms. When we got there, there was one toilet on the first floor for 1,000 seats. One bathroom, 3 toilets, 1 sink, 1,000 people. Got the picture? Really bad. And it was funky. It wasn't just that it was 3 toilets. The toilets were all in these little closets. It was so bad. And so the lines for bathrooms, men and women standing together go, why are we standing together? Well, because that's where we're going. Anyway, so we did all that renovation. But yeah, there was some awful stuff there. But anyway, it was a dream job, though. Regardless of the 25 million and the headaches, I was so fortunate in my career to be able to present really the greatest artists in the world, and in some cases getting to know them and work more closely with them. My calculation is that we've presented something like 2,500 events, over 10,000 artists, 2.5 million people. And there's a lot of stories I can tell, but I just sort of picked 5, and we can expound if we have time. I think I'm all right. So in 1994, when I first got there, Casey was inspired to create the Bardavon Young Playwrights Festival. She initially worked with 20 kids for 20 weeks in one 6th grade class in Poughkeepsie. At the end of the 20 weeks, we'd hire professional actors from New York to come up to work with the kids and their scripts. And after 5 days, we'd present a fully produced, lights, costumes, set pieces, staged readings with scripts in hand. It blew the kids' minds. They'd hear and see their words on the page turned into like fully realized stories with these actors from their lives. And then for them to experience those stories in front of 1,000 of their peers, friends, families, it was pretty unforgettable. The festival went on incredibly for 18 years in Poughkeepsie. And Casey, if you know her, and some people in this room do, she gives like 150%. And then I was directing them all. And so, I had this job at the same time. So that week was always a blowout for me. But it got to the point where it was just sort of overwhelming. Then she started doing versions in Kingston, Beacon, Roundout, and at the Mount Academy. So anyway, at Poughkeepsie, I pulled her funding. After 18 years, I said, I'm pulling your funding. You're done. And it was such a good feeling. And then even though I loved the project, we hadn't taken over UPAC yet when we started this thing. We hadn't taken over the orchestra yet when we started this thing. So it was like too much. And though it was a great, and as I said, went on to other districts and schools. But it wasn't really the most powerful project I ever worked on. We also had special guest actors in to work with the kids. There was a thing called the principal's monologue that they would do for us with the kids before every rehearsl process. James Earl Jones worked with us 3 different times, and the kids didn't know who he was. Until he started talking. They're like, my God, Darth Vader's in the room. They had no clue, and he was so great with the kids. And he talked about his stutter. I don't know if you know this, but he was a major stutterer as a kid and had real trouble speaking, which is hard to imagine when you think about James Earl Jones, the opposite. But he told him that story and said, look, I had to overcome that alone. Besides being black, I had to deal with this stutter. So that was great. It was a great experience. So James Earl, Ed Herman, y'all know who Ed Herman was? A wonderful actor. He was FDR. Gilmore Girls, probably know him from Gilmore Girls. Melissa Leo worked with the kids. And of course, David Strathairn, yeah, of course. David was always, he's such a gamer, that he's willing to do, he's just a willing guy. And remember that slave play that was so powerful. Anyway, so that was Young Playwrights. All right, Estelle Parsons. In 2003, we screened the film Bonnie and Clyde. We knew Estelle Parsons, who won an Oscar for a performance in that film. We knew she had a house in High Falls, actually not far from here. So we contacted her agent and asked if she would join us for a Q&A after the film. She said yes. Or Estelle probably said, yeah. So anyway, and she showed up with her husband, Peter, and her son, Abe. I told her we had an idea that instead of just simply introducing her after the film, we would piggyback that dramatic slow-motion machine gun massacre of Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway, which climaxes the film. We had a machine gun sound effect queued up. And we had a lighting gobo that would project bullet holes across the screen. And then our lighting effect would turn the entire screen red, and blood red. So as she comes stumbling out from backstage, Estelle says, I love it. And as the film ended, without rehearsal, as she stumbled out on cue and in slow motion fell and rolled across the stage dead. And I think she was only about 75 then. She's 96 now. So 2003, that was like 20 years ago, right? So yeah, Estelle's mind-boggling. Still working at 96. The audience went nuts, and naturally, and my relationship with Estelle began that night. We've done many projects together. The one that really stands out, of course, is Oscar Wilde's Salome, with Al Pacino, Marissa Tomei, Diane Wiest, and 12 other actors from the Actors Studio. And Estelle was the director. So 4 Oscar winners in this pretty obscure Oscar Wilde play that he wrote originally for Sarah Bernhardt. So this came about. Estelle was doing a monologue for us with the orchestra. She was doing some Shakespeare monologues over the music. And she came, for some reason, she had forgotten what the theater looked like. She came into the Bardavon and she goes, oh, this would be a really good place for Salome. And I went, you mean the one you're working on with Al Pacino? She said, yeah. And I said, what do I have to do to get that? And she said, well, come down and meet Al. And so they were doing it at what the hell's that place? In Brooklyn, I can't remember. St. Anne's. Thank you, Casey. St. Anne's. This is the thing with this show. Al's kind of a method actor, and they worked on this play for 2 years, okay, at the Actors Studio. Like every week, they'd all get together whenever Al was available, and they'd read through it. So they've been reading this play for 2 years, and Al insisted that they call the play Salome the Reading so that everybody could have scripts. But they've been reading it for 2 years, so the actors really had it in their heads. Al especially. Anyway, I went down to St. Anne's, saw it, and loved it. And I talked to Al, and he was pretty funny. And then he said, "Oh, I got to come up." And so he did. And he came up to the Bardavon, and I can never forget this. He literally, it was like an impersonation of Groucho Marx. Remember how Groucho Marx used to always walk like this, and he had his coat really long behind him? That's how Al came in, and he's saying things like, he's just making grunting noises. And he gets up on the stage, and then I tell him, you know, Sarah Bernhardt played here, which is what the play was written for. And he went, "Oh, she's following me around." I went, "Okay." Look at it that way. Anyway, he did it. He did the show, and it was a huge success. We had 8 sold-out shows at Bardavon prior to a 6-month run on Broadway, which of course sold out. And the funny thing is, Estelle told me this great story that they searched and searched and searched all the Broadway houses because Al wanted a house that looked like the Bardavon. It had to be like the Bardavon. And it was driving them crazy. Finally, they found the Ethel Barrymore, which looks a lot like the Bardavon. It's the 20s theater, but the look of it is very Bardavon. And we have a thrust on our stage, which is an extension off the stage proper that in our case is pretty permanent, but is often removed for an orchestra or whatever. But anyway, so Al was used to having the thrust. So I remember vividly, the producer called me one day, "You just cost me $20,000. I said, "Well, how did I do that?" He goes, "He insists on having a thrust built on this stage." And on Broadway, that's not a cheap thing, you know? And he never used it. He never used the thrust. He used it with us, the last performance he did. The play, Al in his performance, it changed. I saw all of them, of course, and it changed. Every single performance was different than the one before. And, you know, the story of the show is Salome is this beautiful daughter of his, not of his wife, it's not his wife, but his queen. And he's infatuated with her. And he's got John the Baptist in a pit off stage. You know, John the Baptist is captured, right? And so Salome says, "I want," and Herod, which his part was, he wants Salome to dance. That's all he's about. Dance for me, dance for me, dance for me. He's obsessed. And she says, "Okay, I'll dance for you, but first you have to give me the head of John the Baptist on a silver platter." You may have heard this story before. And he says, "No, no, no," a million times no. And finally, okay, it's the head. But his performance, as he's begging Salome, went from sitting in this chair center stage to being on the ground, to literally crawling across the edge of the stage all the way to the end and pounding his forehead into the floor. "Salome!" I was just like, "Whoa, baby." It was fun though. It was great. There's lots of stories about that show. In 2006, I got a call from an agent we work with a lot, telling me he had an artist that needed a few days rehearsal space in our theater in complete privacy. The dates worked, so I asked him, "Who's the artist?" He said, "Well, I can't tell you." And I said, "Well, I can't really do this unless I know who the artist is." And he goes, "Don't think twice. It's all right." And I went, "Holy shit, it's Bob Dylan." That's a Bob Dylan line if you don't know. And that rehearsal was actually for Dylan to finish writing his next album and working out the new songs with his band prior to going to the city to record it. The album was Modern Times. And I made myself the only indispensable member of our staff that had to be on stage if anything was needed. Not that I could have covered it, but anything was needed. So I sat in the wings watching Bob Dylan write Bob Dylan songs, and I'm a lifelong fan. So it was mind-blowing that I just didn't erupt right then and there. And he's come back 5 more times. He likes the space. He's been at UPAC too since that time. And we presented him a couple times in 2017 at the Hutton Brickyards in Kingston. And we're currently actually holding dates for him for the fall to come back and do some more rehearsal, which I'm looking forward to. So when he started, he was like in his late 60s. Now he's in his early 80s, still out there. Again, lots of stories about Dylan, especially the time he used to go, he doesn't do this anymore because he's so old, but he used to go on these walks in Poughkeepsie. He would just take off in disguise, like a hoodie, giant like Jackie O glasses, just sort of dressed inappropriately for the weather, whatever it was. It was hot, he'd be way overdressed. He just looked weird. He's like a weird guy. And he was with his bodyguard. So we'd walk all over Poughkeepsie. And one day I was hanging out in the alley waiting for him like a little dog to come back from his walk. And he walks right up to me and goes, "What's happening, man?" And I was like, "What do you mean, Bob?" And we kicked off 4 different 30-minute conversations while he was there, which, if you know anything about him, it's a rare thing to have a conversation with this guy. And we covered these broad range of subjects like city planning and what happens after a hurricane, and who the heck is Peg Leg Bates? Because I brought up Peg Leg in conversation. But it was cool. It was really cool. In 2017, we booked Aretha Franklin. Now, Aretha is one of the few remaining artists, well, she's not around anymore, but from that time of deep discrimination, when venues routinely were ripping off artists. So she not only signs her own contracts and writers, which is, nobody does that, but in one section about hospitality, she crossed out all references to alcohol, and she wrote in, longhand, she wrote in, "Under no circumstances should any alcohol be backstage, especially around the musicians. X's, O's, happy face, Aretha." Kept that contract. She also has in her contract that of the $150,000 we were paying her for that performance, $25,000 had to be paid in cash before the show to Aretha, and only Aretha. Oh, yeah. And I was like, oh boy, that's going to be fun. Now, she couldn't do the stairs to our understage dressing room, so we had set up a pipe and drape set up in the wings for her to hang out before the show. So picture this. Stephen and I are sitting with the cash outside her pipe and drape room, which is surrounded by 4 bodyguards, waiting for the Queen. We can see inside. She had borrowed a boombox from us, and now boombox. This is 2017. It only plays cassettes, and we happened to have one. And so we gave her the boombox, and she sat in her dressing room playing gospel cassettes in a full-length mink coat, a full hair fall all the way down to here, checking her iPhone. So she's like, cassettes, gospel, iPhone. Strange to me. Anyway, finally, we're told Aretha will see us. And we squeeze into the space, we say hello, and we start counting out the 25,000, which is in stacks of hundreds, wrapped from the bank with a wrapper. After Stephen counts each stack, I put them back in a nice little wrapper. Then Aretha picks up the entire stack, removes all the wrappers, and starts counting it herself, like this. 1, 2, 7, 18, 20. We were like, And then she starts counting for herself. So, then she's done. She takes the whole stack of hundreds to her chest and she goes, "I'm short." And we were like, "Oh, this is what we did." And she said, "It's cool. I must have miscounted. It's cool." We were like, "Okay." And she was totally messing with us. There's no 2 ways about it. Because I talked to other presenters who've had her, and sometimes she says, "You're 2,000 short. I'm not going on." She'll just confront them. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But, whether the money is short. Anyway, so then we just started chatting. She was very chatty. And then she says to me, "I see Mark Twain played here," which he did in 1869, the first year the theater opened. I said, "Yeah." And she says, "Do you think his friend Thomas Edison came to see him?" And I'm like, in my brain, I'm going, they were alive at the same time? And then I'm going, they were friends? I mean, who knows? And then I said, I don't know. We don't have box office records from 1869. But they were alive at the same time, and they were friends. Anyway, so I said, "Do you want me to put the cash in this envelope," which we brought in? And she goes, "No, I have a bag right here." There's a leather bag right underneath her desk there. And then we just kept chit-chatting about different people. And then finally I said, "Well, okay, I'll let you go." So she left. The show starts, encore, overture. Just before she comes out, her guy Will has that bag, brings that bag with the 25 grand. He brings it out on stage, sets it under a chair that she's going to use. Show begins. She does the entire show, 2 encores. She leaves. As soon as she's off stage, Will comes out, brings the bag right off stage. And I'm like, wow. She had her eye on that bag of money from the get-go, from the moment we counted it out. And that's just that what do you even call it? It's just like well, it's a form of paranoia, but it's like, it's history. It's what she had lived through. So she's going to keep her eye on that 25,000. Anyway, that was a mind blower for me. But she was lovely. The great jazz drummer and Woodstock resident, Jack DeJohnette. He's played with everyone from Miles Davis and Wayne Shorter to Bill Evans, Herbie Hancock. He called us in 2021 saying that he was turning 80 and he didn't want to tour anymore, but he wanted to keep playing with some of his friends. Would we be interested in helping him out? And we said, sure. Which friends? And he goes, Carlos Santana, John Batiste, Paul Simon, Savion Glover. We went, okay, and the list goes on. So we've done 5 sold-out concerts with Jack now at either the Woodstock Playhouse or at UPAC with all these guys, except we're still working on Paul Simon. Meanwhile, Jack mentioned that his first instrument was actually the piano. So we presented him in a sold-out piano concert as well at the Playhouse. And as I mentioned earlier, in 2023 at the Woodstock Playhouse, we presented those 2 Sam Shepard one-acts, Tongues and Savage Love, which, incidentally, premiered at the Eureka Theater in 1978. It was like the year I left, actually, is the year that Sam tried those shows out for the first time. And he wrote those pieces. Sam was a drummer before he started being an actor and playwright. So he wrote the plays for 2 actors and a drummer. So Jack drummed, and then Estelle, of course, and David Strathairn were the 2 actors. And I think that brings me full circle. The David Strathairn circle is now ended, and I'm happy to answer any questions or whatever you want. I hope this is all right. It's almost 8 o'clock, so I don't know if I'm late or earlier, or just fine, or yes, sir.
I think the one thing that impressed me for you at the Bardavon is your coup of getting the county to put in the air conditioning across the street.
Oh yeah, good story.
Bringing the ducts in so that we could have a quiet air conditioned
That's funny.
space at the Bardavon.
Yeah, I'll tell that story. The Bardavons, we could not perform in the summer because the Bardavon had no air conditioning when I got there. Or I should say, the air conditioner they had, and Tom, I wish you would have seen this thing. It was like a monster in our basement. It was this gigantic piston thing. It was like a gigantic engine back there that was like scary as hell to, I remember we had some artists that wanted to see it for some reason. Lyle Lovett comes to mind for some reason. Oh, I'm real interested in this stuff. So, anyway, so it didn't work. It failed and it was terrible. And so we had to replace the air conditioning. So we were trying, we designed it, it was all ready to, and then we realized, oh geez, we need to put a cooling tower on the roof of the stage house because it needs to have a cooling tower to operate. And it was like, I don't know, $700,000 or something. And back there, I was like, impossible. I was like, I can't do this. And then one of the engineers had this brilliant idea. He said, the Dutchess County office building is directly across the street. Their entire air conditioning is redundant when you need it, which is usually, night. We could dig a ditch across Market Street, lay a pipe, and connect to their system, and that's what we did. And luckily, Bill Steinhaus, who was the county exec then, certainly saw the political value of, it wasn't going to cost him anything, of allowing us to hook into their air conditioning. That's what we did that for like 20-some years or something. That's how it ran. We just replaced it recently because the county, that building was built in the 60s. So we're pulling from a 60s sort of world, and they only put it on like May 18th is when they put it on, and September 10th. It has nothing to do with climate change or what the weather is. It's like, this is when we do it. It's either hot or cold. I'm like, well, that's not gonna work. Anyway, so we finally got our own air conditioning. But before we did that, we were, what was it? Something, it was before we replaced the air conditioning, it failed. No, that's what it was. It wasn't on because, like I just said, the county couldn't put it on. So in April, a couple years ago, Natalie Merchant, y'all know who Natalie is? she starts a lot of tours with us, rehearses for a few days with us, and then goes out on tour. So she was doing that. She was a world tour. She rehearsed for a few days, and it was one of those days in April a few years ago. It was 90 degrees. It was brutal, early hot thing, and we had sold out houses. So we were like, oh my God! So we had to rent this enormous car-size portable air conditioning, and it wasn't working. And we had it hooked up, and it wasn't working. And we have this air conditioner whisperer, we call him, who came over it was this big giant unit. One of the units wasn't working, but he said, you know, we could just pour water on this, and you wouldn't need the air. We could do it with water. We said, yeah. You know, it was like 45 minutes before the house opened, and so he said, you got a hose? Poke some holes in it. Let's go. And he rigged this thing across this unit, and poured water, and suddenly cold air was coming out of all these vents. And we'd pulled these vents through the exit doors. So it was like this wormhole thing in the Bardavon. Then we covered it all in black so it wouldn't be too obvious, though it was like obvious. The things are this big. Oh my God. And but anyway, it saved the day, and it ended up being fine, and Natalie was totally cool with it, and it was all fine. But thanks for asking that question, because the projects that we've done at the theaters have just been onerous, you know. I mean, there's no easy project, you know. But it's good. It's all fine. It's all good. No Ayn Rand questions? Okay.
Ayn Rand did theater.
Pardon?
Ayn Rand did theater.
Ayn Rand.
She wrote books.
Yeah, she did, but she wrote a play called The Night of January 16th, and I performed in it when I was 17 at my high school. It was this really Ayn Rand kind of edgy thing. The thing that was amazing about my teacher was that he would do this stuff. Chekhov. Who does Chekhov in high school, you know? Or Ionesco, a great absurdist. He didn't do Beckett, but, you know, he could have. I mean, it was just really an education, and opened me up to, you know, stuff beyond Neil Simon, which was really what was happening back in those days. He was like, you know, a big deal. Anyway, and yes, please.
Did you ever have anything to do with community theater in Rhinebeck?
Nope.
Center for Performing Arts Center?
No. I never really did. I mean, I guess you could call the Eureka Theater a community theater because we didn't get paid, you know. So I guess that marks you as non-professional. But we felt we put on, you know, professional. I mean, we moved 2 shows to a commercial run, so that does indicate its level of professionalism. And we were good. You know, I hate to, we were a good, tough little theater for a lot of years. The church burned down. It was like about a year or 2 after I moved to New York. It was so sad. And I remember the Oscar, who was directing the play that was in the theater. Oscar Eustace, he runs the Public Theater now, and he ran the Eureka Theater for a short time after I left. And he was doing a South African play at the time when the fire burned everything down. He was convinced that it was arson or something. I said, no, I know what the wires were like in that ancient church. It was not arson. Anything could have happened at any time. But it was sad. And I remember I went back and visited it, and for some reason they let me in to look around. I guess it was shortly after the fire. And so I saw this, like my life all charred in there from those early days. And then the real interesting thing about that building, and I don't know if you remember this, Steve, is they tore it down, obviously, eventually, right? This gives you, and it's also just a lesson in how the real estate market has changed so dramatically. So this was like about 1980 or something when it burned down. 81. And then they left the basement, which is where the theater was, completely exposed. It was there. And I would go down, whenever I'd visit San Francisco, I was going, there's the theater. It's right there, because it was underground. So you'd see where the stairs went to the dressing rooms, and you know the old stage. I mean, it was charred and everything, but it was like ghostly to go. And there was a fence all around it, so I just remember things from that fence. But anyway, and then the theater moved several more times, and as I said, lasted a long time. No questions about Altamont?
Chris, did you ever have a favorite show?
Bob Dylan. Well, so many. I mean, I can't even tell you how many people we've had. I mean, like David Sedaris. We bring David Sedaris every other year. He's one of the funniest people I've ever seen or heard in my life. And backstage, on stage, wherever he is, it's just a natural thing with him. So we bring him back a lot. You know, some of those guys that I saw at Bill Graham's Fillmore are still working. You know, Yorma and Jack, for instance, from the Jefferson Airplane, Yorma Calkin and Jack Cassidy, they still tour as Hot Tuna. And we just booked, they're coming in October. We've had them a dozen times. And we chat about those days because they're, you know, it's fond to them too. And I remember when we booked the Jefferson, what was left of it wasn't the airplane, it was a Starship. And Marty Ballin and Paul Kantner, who were original members of the airplane, were still in the band. And I talked to Marty, who was really a friendly guy, and I said I was at Altamont, you know, and at Altamont is where Marty, over the microphone, they announced, the Hells Angels just beat up Marty Ballin. You know, it's like, we were like, all in acid, you know, going, what? And Marty goes, oh yeah, I was really convinced I was not going to make it out of there alive because it was so, you know, back then at the Altamont concert, unlike Woodstock, where it was a much better produced event, Altamont, the stage was this tall off this, so this is where the stage is, and you're the customer. It's like, what? And the Hells Angels are all around it. It was bizarre, and 300,000, you know, stoned hippies, you know, in the audience. But yeah, what was the question? Oh, favorite artist. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's just unreal. Patti LaBelle we had once, man, talk about leaving it all on the stage. We used to try to do meet and greets and stuff, you know, with the artists. We stopped after COVID, but Patti said, yeah, we can do a meet and greet, but it has to be before the show, because after the show, I'm a mess. And sure enough, I went to talk to her after the show, and she was like, it's like her entire face had melted across her face. But she put on a show that like I'd never seen before. And during the meet and greet, there was a major donor there with her daughter. And she kept calling her daughter my angel. And so Patti goes, well, why do you call her your angel? And I said, because my husband died, while my husband was dying of cancer, my angel was with him every single day. And Patti just like lost it right then and there, just hearing the story. And then she's on stage, she's performing. And all of a sudden she sees the little girl in the audience. She goes, it's the angel, my angel. And the audience is going, what is she talking about? And she tells the story from the stage. And it's just, you know, it's like wonderful when you see an artist do that. You know, when you go, they're so real. It's so such a real thing. And so, you know, that not that I'm a huge Patti LaBelle fan, but what she did and how she performed, it was just, it was extraordinary. You know, we've had Patti Smith a lot, the rocker. She's like almost 80 now herself, still killing it. She always puts on just an unbelievably strong show. She doesn't know how to do it any other way. You know, it's just how she does it. Certainly, when we had Pacino, he would sign everything, anything anybody wanted him to sign. So we would go back literally every night with a box of stuff. And he or someone would sign them all. He's kind of a scribble of, yeah, you know, across the page. Then after every show, you know, there was always a crowd in the alley behind the Bardavon, and you know, we had security out there and stuff. But he would go out and sign and take pictures and just be such a great character, really. But I remember I terrified my daughter. She was about 8, maybe. She's a little kid. I said, you want to meet Al Pacino? And she went, okay, like she could care less. And so she's in the wings, and Al comes in as he did. Now, the thing is with Pacino, with this character, he played Herod, you know, and Herod was a king, but his interpretation, it was modern dress, his interpretation was Herod never took a bath, never washed his hair, never changed his clothes. So every day, Al came in with the exact same clothes, hair matted. I mean, it was like, ooh, smelling. It was like bizarre, but that's how he rolled. So he comes in, you know, in his Groucho way, my little daughter's standing there, and I'm going, Al, here she is, and he comes right up to her, and she was like, and he was like, hey, little girl, she was like horrified, terrified. She was like, hi, and then he left, and she goes, Daddy, he's a strange man. Anyway,
Probably do one more question and then.
please, whatever. Yes.
Casey?
I just want to say that it was kind of miraculous that you even got these jobs, because at that time, you know, the big events around here were like the Davenport's tractor pull. You know, that was going on at all. And I love them. We love them. They were the best. And sorry they don't have them anymore. But yeah, definitely.
Well, yeah.
But, you know, I was doing most of the work, and then Chris would do, and my dad used to say, your husband would do anything to keep the family going. And it was true, because we had to do a lot of odd jobs. Some of our friends were more successful. They used to paint somebody's house or whatever. And it got to the point where Chris said, I'm going to go apply for the job in High Falls. I'm going to be a High Falls mailman.
That's right. That's right. I was going to deliver your mail. I said, look, it's a good job. They have a pension, you know.
I mean, it's, you know, we've been friends with a lot of the people in High Falls.
had Jesse.
That's right, exactly. So I said, you know what, that's where I draw the line, and we're going to have to move to LA.
Well, yeah.
Oh, there's no work for you.
Well, Casey wouldn't move to LA, so.
Out of the blue, those jobs appeared.
Well, you know, it's also funny about.
And I have to say that you didn't bring this up, but in Dutchess County, they did not want to hire Chris. They thought
No,
he was too
I was a little too wild for them.
Yeah, and two guys stuck up for him and said, it doesn't matter if he doesn't wear a suit. And his recommendation, and Betty's funeral's tomorrow, Betty Davenport, her, Nick Rama, and
But that was UPAC, but nevertheless.
well, yeah,
Yeah.
and
But what is funny about this, I was going to say, as I said, UPAC was the job I was applying for, and Bardavon was like second. So as soon as I applied for the job, I found out who's their board of directors. You know, I started doing the schmooze, and I found out that there was Davenport's, of course, involved. What's her name? Long gone. Witt. Yeah, she was the major force for them. But I knew Nick Rama. He was my butcher, who was her like son, grandson. What was he? Father, son-in-law.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I go to Nick's butcher shop, and I go, Nick, I'm trying to get this job at UPAC. What can you do to help me? Can you talk to somebody? Can you write a letter? Blah, blah, blah. And he did. He wrote like a letter of recommendation from your butcher. And the reason I bring it up is because it was brought up to me. He goes, well, remember the note from your butcher that, that we got. But anyway.
that's kind of like how it all happened. I mean, there are like some very, connect the dots, kooky kind of Ulster County greats.
It was funny.
Small town, and
Yeah.
it was then, and in many ways it still is.
And Bardavon back then too was very conservative. The Duchess is more conservative certainly than Ulster in general, just to make a generalization. But
And also that group of people had saved the Bardavon.
yeah.
When IBM went out, I mean, it was insane.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that actually
They really were.
both the Bardavon and UPAC, I don't know if you guys know this, were going to be torn down at exactly the same time because of IBM. IBM, hitting, not IBM, I'm sorry, because of the downtowns. This is when like malls came along and destroyed downtowns all over America. And certainly Poughkeepsie was really screwed by that. Lucky Platt closed, these huge Macy's-sized department stores because of the freaking malls. And the same thing happened in Kingston. So they both were going to be torn down and made into parking lots. Isn't that incredible? And citizens like us who owned homes, mortgaged their homes to save both theaters in separate parts of these counties. It's amazing. And I knew some of those people when I first started. They were like still around. But that's what it took. Newburgh had 5 theaters on Broadway, 5. big theaters on Broadway. Now there's none. There's the Ritz, but it's not operating as a theater anymore specifically. And they're all torn down. They were all torn down. It's just so sad. So that's part of the reason why I'm so happy we were able to renovate these theaters, so that they aren't going to be in a place that, oh, you just tear it down. You know, it's a ruin. You know, actually, when we took over UPAC, we kind of thought it was like a warehouse. So it was just like, because nothing was happening there. It was just like not happening. And anyway, but it all worked out.
Which person's your wife?
Huh?
Which person's your wife?
Casey.
Hi.
Casey Curdy.
Who was the director before you at UPAC?
Ron Marquette.
Oh, was it Ron?
Yeah.
Ron,
That's my job.
Yeah, Ron was the, yeah.
Then you went to Shadowland.
No, he came from Shadowland. He started Shadowland, and then he went to UPAC, and then he went to UC after UPAC, I believe. And he passed away many years ago. But yeah, I thank God he did the carpeting. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you. This was fabulous.